10 years after the world fell apart, a man named Salvador lived with his two younger brothers, Oliver and Benjamin, in a small wooden cabin deep in the mountains. Years ago, Salvador's leg was bitten by a zombie. To stop the infection from spreading, their mother had no choice but to cut it off with her own hands. But Salvador never gave in to despair. Even on one leg, he pushed himself to keep training to stay strong. Food in this world was almost impossible to find. Most days, the brothers survived on nothing but crushed-up bugs, with just a drizzle of honey on top. That was their meal for an entire day. Hoping to bring home something better, Oliver and Benjamin headed into the forest to try their luck. Before long, they stumbled across a small dog. Afraid it might run off, Oliver immediately radioed Salvador for backup. The boy held the bone in his hand to lure it closer, and as soon as the dog let its guard down and leaned in to lick, Salvador, waiting quietly behind, pulled the trigger. Back at the cabin, Salvador quickly prepared lunch. But the food on the table wasn't the little dog, it was a frog. When Benjamin realized that the frog he had been secretly raising was now their meal, he broke down, crying uncontrollably. But in the apocalypse, survival came before everything else. Filling your stomach was more important than sentiment. The youngest brother just couldn't understand that. Through tears, he cursed Salvador, calling him the worst brother in the world. Of course, the little dog hadn't escaped its fate either. Salvador cleaned it, separating the organs and bones into different containers. Later, Oliver scooped out some of the broken bones to feed the rats they were raising. But just then, strange noises echoed from the basement. Salvador's expression changed instantly. He ordered Oliver to take Benjamin upstairs right away. Once the boy was safe, the two older brothers armed themselves and carefully pushed open the basement door. Step by step, they crept down the stairs until they reached the very end. There, hidden in the dark, was a cell. Chains rattled violently, as if something monstrous was locked inside. The next day, Salvador sat in his room, secretly working on some handmade project. But before he could finish, Benjamin suddenly burst through the door. It turned out the noise had come from a pair of zombies falling from their chains. These creatures weren't strangers, they were the original owners of this house. Feeling a wave of guilt, the three brothers worked together to drag the zombies back into their cell. But survival in the apocalypse was never easy. The vegetables Salvador planted weren't growing well, and for 3 weeks in a row, he hadn't caught anything worth eating. Desperate, he finally decided to risk leaving the cabin in search of food. But the moment he was gone, Benjamin crept downstairs on tiptoe. With trembling hands, he stole the keys. He had tried this once before, but Salvador had caught him and scolded him harshly. That warning, however, only fueled the boy's curiosity even more. He couldn't stop wondering, what was the monster in the basement? What did it really look like? This time, Benjamin finally made it to the cell. He grabbed a wooden stick and tossed it into the darkness, just to see what would move. But what he saw froze him in place. The monsters chained in that cell were his own parents. Shocked beyond words, Benjamin stood there in a daze, until the zombified figures of his mother and father lunged forward, grabbing hold of him. Luckily, Salvador and Oliver rushed in just in time, pulling Benjamin away from their grasp. Looking at his terrified little brother, Salvador finally broke the silence and revealed the truth. Years earlier, when the virus first spread, this family had come to the cabin to hide from the disaster. But even here, they couldn't escape. The zombies found them, and their parents had their hearts ripped out. By sheer luck, the two older boys had been outside at the time, and baby Benjamin, still in his crib, was overlooked. Not wanting his little brother to grow up brokenhearted, Salvador lied. He told Benjamin their parents had gone away on a long trip. In reality, he locked their zombified bodies in the basement, clinging to the desperate hope that one day a cure would be invented and their parents could be brought back. Hearing the truth left Benjamin shattered. He couldn't stand to see his parents like this. Deep down, he wanted to cure them, no matter how impossible it sounded. To his surprise, Oliver agreed. In his eyes, their parents weren't monsters, just sick people, and keeping them chained up forever would never lead to a cure. So the very next day, the three brothers armed themselves and led their undead parents outside. Benjamin held his mother's hand, guiding her through the sunlight, showing her the world she once loved. Along the way, he kept talking to her, sharing old stories and memories, convinced that if she could just remember who she used to be, maybe, just maybe, she would slowly come back. And so, the three brothers spent the day walking their zombie parents around the yard, as if nothing had ever changed. Over the next few days, the brothers stayed fully armed, carefully controlling their parents, while trying to reintroduce them to human life. They bathed the zombies, played interactive games, and even built 2 brand new beds in the basement, trying to recreate the feeling of a normal family. For a moment, It was almost like they were back to being 5 again. Benjamin took it a step further. He patiently taught their parents basic routines, training them like obedient pets. To his shock, it actually worked. Even without chains, their zombified parents no longer tried to attack them. Encouraged by this progress, Benjamin couldn't wait to grab his notebook. He wanted to teach them how to talk again, even how to read. But Salvador warned him to face reality. Sure, they could train zombies to follow simple commands, but their parents would never truly be the same as before. And yet, when it came time to feed them, something unbelievable happened. Their father actually spoke one of the very words they'd just taught him. The brothers were overjoyed, clinging to the hope that maybe, just maybe, their parents could come back. Tomorrow was Christmas, and Benjamin dreamed of giving their parents a real gift. So, that night, he organized a basement party, complete with music, laughter, and even a family photo with both his brothers and their undead mom and dad. For a moment, joy returned to their lives. But just as they let their guard down, Salvador noticed something outside. He quickly ordered Oliver and Benjamin to lead the zombies back into the basement, then grabbed his crossbow and stepped into the dark to investigate. But Salvador only had one leg, and in the shadows, a figure suddenly lunged at him, knocking him to the ground. The stranger didn't strike again. Instead, she pulled back her hood, revealing a young woman who looked almost the same age as Salvador. The stranger explained she'd only come because she heard zombies howling nearby. Not wanting anyone to discover the truth about their parents, the brothers quickly changed the subject, claiming they were just having Christmas dinner. Hearing that, the girl finally let her guard down, and without hesitation, she sat herself at their table. She devoured every bite of food like she hadn't eaten in days. Her name was Valeria, strong-willed, sharp-tongued, carrying herself like she was the oldest sibling in the room. It turned out she had tracked them here because Salvador had lost his backpack at the river a few days earlier. Valeria found it, followed the map inside, and eventually reached the cabin. She wasted no time pointing out the flaws in their setup. The zombies outside had to be cleared, otherwise they'd attract trouble, and every window needed to be covered immediately. Then Valeria asked something strange. She wanted to know if they had seen a group of Russians. Supposedly they were flying around the world, dropping crates marked with red crosses. Inside those crates was a serum, rumored to reverse the infection itself. But Salvador? He didn't buy it for a second. After all, since the outbreak, countless so-called vaccines had been distributed. None of them stopped the virus. Some even made it mutate into something worse. Valeria laid the truth out on the table. Salvador and his brothers had two choices. Either they stay locked away in this cabin, safe for now, but cut off from the world, until the day loneliness finally consumes them. Or they take the risk, leave with her, and search for the cure. Then she revealed the real reason she sought them out. Somewhere nearby lurked a group of gunners, heavily armed men who once slaughtered her companions. They were still in the area, and sooner or later, they'd find this place. Even with the warning, Salvador refused. He wanted nothing to do with outsiders. Coldly, he ordered Valeria to leave. But by now, night had already fallen. Valeria pleaded for just one night of shelter. And then, she played her last card, the kind of persuasion only a woman can wield. Maybe it was the pull of youth, maybe it was hormones, but Salvador finally relented, agreeing to let her stay. After a bath, Valeria didn't stop there. She slid into his room, her freshly washed skin carrying a soft fragrance, and brazenly pushed Salvador out of his own bed. Sensing his nervousness, she leaned closer, teasing, tempting, until Salvador finally gave in and experienced, for the first time, the forbidden thrill of adulthood. But even after that night, he didn't change his mind. He made it clear, Valeria could only stay one night. Nothing more. The next morning, while Salvador was still fast asleep, Valeria crept into the kitchen and started raiding whatever food she could find. But just then, an awful roar echoed from the basement. Curiosity got the better of her. She found the key, unlocked the door, and stepped into the darkness, until she came face to face with the iron cage. The zombies inside caught the scent of a stranger. In a split second, one lunged out of the shadows, its claws wrapping around Valeria's hair, yanking her violently forward. She screamed, and at the last moment, Salvador rushed in, pulling her free. But not before the creature ripped away a chunk of her scalp. The zombie stuffed it into its mouth, chewing greedily as Valeria shrieked in agony. Realizing what Salvador had been hiding, Valeria turned on him in rage, screaming, cursing, demanding answers. But she didn't get the chance. In the very next second, the zombie surged forward again and dragged her back into the cage. Salvador tried to stop it. He clawed at her arms, pulled with all his strength, but it was already too late. All he could do was watch as she was torn apart, devoured piece by piece. By the time his brothers rushed downstairs, the horror was already in full view. They stood frozen, staring at Valeria's half-eaten body. And in that moment, Salvador finally understood how foolish his hope had been. Afterward, they dragged what was left of her corpse outside and mounted it on a spike in the yard. A grim reminder. Zombies were monsters, bloodthirsty and savage. They could never go back to what they once were. And now that they'd tasted human flesh again, there was no going back. They refused to touch rats ever again. Benjamin couldn't stand watching their parents grow weaker by the day. So, in his desperation, he came up with a horrifying idea: feeding them with Valeria's half-eaten corpse. But Salvador knew exactly where that road would lead. If his brother took even one step further, there'd be no turning back. So, before Benjamin could act, Salvador set fire to what was left of Valeria's body, reducing it to ashes. Yet Benjamin still refused to give up. His obsession twisted into something darker. If they couldn't find corpses, then why not hunt the living? Why not capture people to keep their parents fed? Oliver didn't stop him either. Their sense of right and wrong was slipping away. But Salvador still fought to hold them together, still tried to drag his brothers back to some kind of humanity. Finally, he made a brutal choice. To end the nightmare, he grabbed his crossbow and went down into the basement, determined to finish their parents once and for all. But when he raised the weapon, something shocking happened. Their mother pressed her forehead against the tip of the arrow, as if she understood, as if she wanted him to end it. That tiny flicker of awareness shattered Salvador's resolve. Against his better judgment, he broke his own rule, choosing to keep them alive by feeding them human flesh. The very next day, he began training his brothers to set traps. He spread a map across the table, pointing to areas where survivors might be hiding. Then he showed them exactly how to bait their prey. Under his plan, Oliver and Benjamin soon tracked down a target, an old man wandering alone. Their cruel trick was simple. Benjamin pretended to be wounded, luring the stranger in with his cries for help. And just as the man leaned closer, his foot slammed down onto the trap. From the shadows, Oliver stepped forward with a crossbow in hand, ready to finish the job. Oliver had never taken a life before, and when the old man suddenly lunged, his hands tightening around Oliver's throat, panic consumed him. Oliver froze, unable to fight back. He was about to be strangled to death. At the very last second, Benjamin snapped into action. With a wild cry, he drove a blade straight into the man's body. And when the old man still refused to fall, Benjamin lifted a heavy rock and smashed it down until there was nothing left but silence. Breathing hard, the two brothers wrapped up the corpse, preparing to drag it back home. But what they didn't realize was that someone else had already been watching them, someone hidden in the trees. That night, they returned with fresh meat for their parents, but along with it, they had unknowingly brought danger to their doorstep. As dusk fell, strange howls echoed through the forest. The brothers had never heard anything like it. Gripping their weapons tight, they stood on edge, waiting for whatever was out there to reveal itself. And then, it did. Glass shattered as a figure burst through the window. Salvador instantly raised his shotgun, ready to fire. But instead of attacking, the intruder held out his hands and spoke quickly, insisting he meant no harm. The man explained he was being hunted by a ruthless group known only as the Gunners. And to him, dying right here by Salvador's hand would be better than falling into theirs. Without waiting for permission, he ducked inside the cabin, demanding they fight together if they had any hope of surviving the evil that was coming. But it didn't take long for Salvador to notice something strange. Ever since the man entered, his eyes kept flicking to Salvador's watch. When Salvador finally called him out, the man dropped the act. In one swift motion, he tore open his shirt, revealing a horn-shaped tattoo etched across his chest. Salvador's blood ran cold as he realized the truth. The man was one of the Gunners. Without wasting a second, he urged Oliver and Benjamin to hide in the basement. But it was already too late. The intruder's accomplices had smashed through the windows and were pouring inside. Salvador tried to fight back, but the man kicked him hard to the ground and drove shards of broken glass into his chest. Just in the nick of time, Oliver and Benjamin fired their crossbows, forcing the Gunners to release Salvador. The three of them scrambled down into the basement, while the cultists regrouped upstairs. Salvador was badly injured, and his brothers weren't exactly combat ready. Left with no other choice, Salvador released their two zombified parents. One of the intruders didn't react fast enough. He was pounced on and mauled by Salvador's father. Another man ran in, only to freeze in horror as he watched his companion being devoured. But then, the mother appeared from behind, attacking one of the Gunners. The intruder reacted immediately, shooting her father square in the head. Terrified, their mother fled in a panic. Seeing this, the remaining cultists didn't rush in. Instead, they lobbed a single tear gas grenade. With no way to fight back in the chaos, the three brothers had no choice but to surrender. The brothers were tied up, helpless, deep in the forest. Around a flickering bonfire, the cultists performed a sinister ritual, throwing their zombified parents into the flames. Once the ritual was complete, one of the men retrieved a vial from a chest. The entire ceremony had been a twisted means to obtain that serum. Next, Salvador was dragged onto an altar. The man raised a dagger, plunging it straight into Salvador's chest. The poor boy was mercilessly slaughtered by these cultists. But just as all seemed lost, a chilling growl echoed through the trees. Oliver froze in disbelief, and then the ropes binding him suddenly loosened. From the shadows, the mother zombie appeared, tearing through the cultists with terrifying speed and ferocity. Oliver raced toward the serum, only to find the man had already snatched it. Empowered by the vial, the man ignored the zombies entirely, thinking he was untouchable. With the mother zombie being pushed back, danger was at its peak. At the critical moment, Oliver grabbed a gasoline can and doused the man in fuel. Flames roared to life, engulfing him, and his screams were silenced forever as the fire consumed him completely. Oliver quickly freed his younger brother and grabbed the serum from the ground. Without hesitation, he injected it into their mother. But in the chaos, Benjamin was bitten. And now, the only remaining vial had already been used on their mother. Benjamin broke down, tears streaming down his face as despair consumed him. The next day, Oliver erected gravestones for their father and Salvador. With their mother restored to life, and Benjamin now transformed into a mutated creature, Oliver led them away from the forest for good. Together, they set out on a grim journey, searching for new serum,